You've spent some time putting together an idea and you like what you've come up with, but you're still stuck in that 8-bar loop and don't know how to arrange your track. So in today's video, I'm going to show you 8 of my favorite tips to create and release tension to finally be able to take that 8-bar loop and turn it into a full release ready track. Let's dive in. Here's a loop that I have prepared, which is exactly 8 bars long, has a kick, some tops, percussion, pad sound, and a bass. Alright, pretty cool vibe. I feel like this is something that I genuinely enjoy. I could turn it into a full track, but I'm stuck in that 8-bar loop. So tip number 1 is duplicate and manage bass. First thing we're going to do is highlight our entire section. We can either do that manually with the mouse or hit Command A to select everything. And we're going to duplicate it once, twice, 3 times. So now instead of having that 8-bar loop, we have a 32-bar loop. Cool. Which elements here contain the most bass? It's the kick here and the bass down here. So how about we create some anticipation by removing the kick for exactly 8 bars. Let's say we progress into the track here for 8 bars. After those 8 bars, we remove the kick completely. So make sure you're in that 8-bar grid, right click, fix grid 8 bars, and remove the kick for 8 bars. Now I'm going to give it a playthrough from here. Let's see how it sounds. Cool, now a bit of anticipation is now created. Since the main rhythmic pulse, which is the kick, is suddenly turned off, there is a sense of space. Hey, if you're enjoying this video, then feel free to hit that like, subscribe, and bell notification button. It really does help me grow, and it allows me to spend more time on these videos so I can come up with more valuable stuff for you. So feel free to do that. What happens if we remove the bass now completely? Let's see how this sounds. That creates a bit too much anticipation. So how do we gradually fade out the bass without it sounding too sudden, without it creating this random space right here? So what I'm going to do is add an auto filter right onto my bass layer over here. And now I have 2 options. I can either slowly dial back down the higher frequencies, or I could do it the other way around and dial back the low frequencies by changing it to low cut and slowly creating a low cut automation. And since we're working with a bass sound, which barely contains any high frequencies, it makes more sense to remove the lows, right? So let's take away the resonance. We don't want any flavoring on our EQ here. We're going to add a bit of a low cut automation right before the break hits. And let's see how this sounds. So how about we start at 0 and add a bit of a low cut here. Cool, that's one way to do it. I like it, but I feel like there's still too much space and it feels too sudden. So what I'm gonna do is actually delete the complete automation here and allow the bass to be played in this break section, but then just create a gradual low cut automation while the break is active. So let's see how this sounds if we slowly remove the bass within the break section here. Much smoother. Way better. Nice. Okay, so managing your bass is by far the most important thing when it comes to being able to arrange your track. So now that we've managed the bass, we also want to manage the higher frequencies. And in this case, the higher frequencies are dominated by the tops. So we're practically going to do the same with an auto filter. So I'm going to add an auto filter to my tops group here, remove the resonance, and again, we could either remove the lows or we can also remove the highs. And since this is an element that contains most of its energy in the higher frequencies, it makes sense to add a high cut automation. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. Let's click on this frequency knob over here, hit A to move into automation mode, basically this guy over here. And if you're wondering why it doesn't work, that's most likely because your keyboard is enabled here. So disable the keyboard, the MIDI keyboard. We want to be able to use our keyboard here for the shortcuts. Hit A to quickly move into automation mode. So again, let's filter down the higher frequencies in the course of the break here, and let's see how that sounds. Nice. That's pretty cool. That creates a lot of space. And now if we hit Option on Mac, or I believe it's Alt on Windows, you can see that we suddenly gain the ability to control the curve here. So if we drag here, we start to change the curve of our automation, which is really practical if you want to add more smoothness or suddenness to your automations. So now I've just hit Alt or Option and dragged it a bit more up here. So most of the curvature happens towards the end. So a lot of high frequencies here. Just hear the bass fading out first. And now pay attention to the highs. Suddenly disappear. Cool. Tip number 3 is to open up the cutoff on your synths. If you want to create tension, you have to find at least one single sound that you can open up. Every synthesizer comes with a frequency cutoff or a cutoff knob that allows you to open up the sound and introduce higher frequencies. So for the bass layer, for example, we can hit this frequency knob and slowly open up the sound to introduce more higher frequencies in it. I mean, that move alone already creates a lot of tension. So let's zoom in a bit. Go back into 8-bar mode, click on frequency, click A so we see the automation. Set 2 automation points at the beginning and at the end. And now what we're going to do is basically drag the sound up right here. So open up the sound right before the drop hits, before we release the energy. Let's listen to how this sounds. So opening up the cutoff on the bass sounds cool. It adds a bit of tension, a bit of anticipation, but it's just not enough. What if we could add another element to which we can open up that cutoff? So what I'm going to do is under the bass, create a MIDI track. And you see for the bass, I use the saw pure muted bass. I'm just going to copy it and paste it on the track below. How about we create some chords? Chords are really the best element to open up the cutoff. And to be able to play chords with this synthesizer over here, we want to make sure to go into this volume section. So just click in this area over here and make sure that the voices are set to at least 4 or preferably 8 if your CPU can handle it. Just make sure that it's not set to mono because mono only allows us to play one note at a time. Let's make sure we stick with 8 for now. This way we can play chords. Nice. So you can see that our atmospheric pad is in C sharp minor, and if we double click the bass line, it's also, the scale utilizes C sharp minor. So we're going to stick with C sharp minor chords. So let's dial down the volume here on our chords. Let's also call this one chords. Highlight the entire break section over here and then hit Command Shift M to create a MIDI clip. And then automatically this MIDI clip opens up. If not, then just double click your MIDI clip. You can now enable scale, C sharp, and we're going to stick with minor. Minor is usually very mellow scale. And we're going to stick with C sharp, add a minor third. So 1, 2, 3 semitones above the root, and then add a perfect fifth, which is 7 halftone steps above the root. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now we have a basic minor chord. Cool. We're going to take this chord and just add a bit of rhythmic information like that and loop this section up over here. I mean, that alone just creates so much tension. What you can do is then maybe take down the velocity on some of these guys over here like that. Awesome. Just click on frequency again, hit A to go back into automation mode, set a starting point, set an end point, and then slowly add an automation curve so we open up the higher frequencies here. Notice how the sound is opening up. It's pretty cool, but I feel like it's first of all pretty loud, so I'm going to dial the track back down. And the curve, I'm going to adjust that again by hitting Option or Alt on my keyboard, and then just readjusting the curve so most of the automation happens right before the drop, right? So it's smooth during the beginning, but towards the end it becomes more intense. So now I like the way this sounds, but I still feel like we're lacking effects. It just sounds way too dry. One thing we can do is then add a washout effect. Therefore, make sure to blend in the return channels over here by hitting this R. So you see both of these return channels, also known as your effect channels. One of them already by default has a reverb and another one has a delay loaded up. So let's say we want to gradually automate the chords channel to move into the reverb. Therefore, we're just going to click on the send channel A over here that says -infinity and automate this into our return channel, which is A. And make sure that all of your effects that are on your return channels, like this reverb and delay, are always set to 100% because return channels are meant to output us or return us the affected signal. So let's automate the reverb here. Same thing, similar to the cutoff automation, we're just going to gradually increase the reverb. And how about we do the same for the delay? So then we set start and endpoint and increase the delay as well. And if we open up our automations in a new lane, we can see, okay, this is the delay. And then mixer here. Okay, track A is the reverb. Open up a new lane. So we have two automation lanes. The upper lane is the reverb. The lower lane is the delay. Let's see how this sounds. It's cool, but I feel like our reverb and delay could be a bit more intense. So what I'm going to do is just tweak my reverb settings a bit. Mainly it's the decay that I like to tweak for a longer reverb and allowing more frequencies to enter the reverb here. And what we're also going to do is set a low cut after the reverb. So our reverb doesn't contain any low end mud, which is also really important. And the delay, I feel like switching that out for another one. So let's delete this and add another delay that I personally really like, which is echo. And let's add a dotted eighth note delay. Dotted eighth note delays are pretty great. Reverb, set that to 0. We don't want any reverb. Set it to ping pong and 100% dry wet. And then let's adjust the curves so we hear the effects a bit sooner. Hit play. Nice. And another thing that I forgot to mention previously is that if we hit our frequency here, we can then also create a dip right before the drop hits. So what I'm going to do is just drag the main cutoff frequency back a bit so that we open up the sound and then suddenly close it back down right before the drop hits. Let's see how this sounds. Let's do that a bit earlier. Also pretty cool, right? So 1 bar before the drop hits, we are reducing the cutoff frequency here. Nice. Let's do that for the bass as well. Nice. And the cool thing is that you don't necessarily need to add this specific reverb. You can try out different reverbs, different delays, and just see which washout effect vibes with you the most. And also just mess around with the automation, the curves, that really does a lot. Tip number 5 is to insert silence. Silence always creates space and creates some anticipation. And one way of doing that is to either select your section here and hit Command I. That automatically creates a space here. I'm going to undo that. Or I could click somewhere and then hit Command I. This pop-up window opens up. I'm just going to set it to 1 bar here. Click OK. So let's see how this sounds. Yeah, creates a lot of extra anticipation. Tip number 6 is to fill out this silence with some type of a riser or sweep. Therefore, I'm just going to go into Yerevan, a newly released pack of mine. Yeah, I like this sound because it sweeps in and it gradually fades out. So I'm just going to add this riser here and make sure that it's set to exactly where the drop hits. And sometimes these risers are also warped automatically by Ableton Live. If you turn that off, that's ideal because you don't want any extra artifacts in your transition sounds, especially if they don't contain any type of rhythmic or BPM information. So yeah, make sure to turn off the warp. Let's then reduce the volume on the track and send this track to our reverb and delay as well. So it's affected by these two return channels as well. Let's give it a play. Cool. And at this point, I can just mess around with different transition effects and see which one vibes the most with me. Yeah, I feel like this one does the job well. You can also use tonal transition effects, and I have a pack called Ambiente, which contains a few of those as well. So atmospheric transitions, tonal, and since we are in the key of C# minor, we also want to use a tonal transition that is in C# minor. So I'm just going to drag this one here. And by the way, if you hit Command, you go off grid, and that really helps when it comes to transition sounds like these. So same thing, reduce the volume, make sure that warping is off because we don't have any BPM information in the sound. Send it into our reverb and delay return. Let's see how this sounds. Nice. Tip number 7 is to add echo feedback automation on at least one important element in the beginning of your build section. So let's consider this to be the beginning section of our build. We want to add some element that is important, that takes the listener's focus. And you can take any sound. I find that vocals really work well. I like this one, it vibes with me, but it's not in the right key of our track. It's an E minor, so that means we're gonna have to pitch it down 1, 2, 3. So if we move down from E to C sharp, that's exactly 3 semitones. So again, 1, 2, 3. See, now it fits to the key of our track. On this element, we are gonna now add an echo, and we're gonna add a feedback automation. So we're gonna start at 50%, and during the course of the build up here, we're going to create more tension by increasing it to about 97%. Everything above 100% becomes really dangerous. So right below 100% is usually my favorite setting. Okay, it fades out pretty quick. That's because we're going to have to set this automation value here, right when the sound occurs. Nice. And then you can really play around with different sounds, different delay settings, different feedback settings. So if we were to exaggerate and go above 100%, which is really dangerous, let's see how it sounds. Sexy. But it starts distorting. What? And if you do that, make sure to control your feedback by at least dialing it down before the drop hits. So what I'm going to do is then create a bit of an intense feedback automation here, and then dial it down in the course of the build-up right before the drop hits. And if you'd like to step it up a bit, you can then also add another sound to the second half of your build-up. So right after this section over here, which is 8 bars long, we're going to add another sound. And usually if you add sounds in like this, it overwrites your automation, which can be pretty annoying. So make sure that automation lock is enabled. So if you do end up dragging in sounds, it doesn't change your automation value. Let's just undo that really quick. Add the sound right here after 8 bars. And then make sure to pitch it to the right key again. 1, 2, 3. Some new automation points here. There we go. Nice. Tip number 8 is to add an element of surprise to your drop. So somewhere around the drop, you would like to create a sound or add a sound that suddenly shifts the attention of the listener to that specific sound. You now have released the energy, but you'd still like to keep it interesting. So what we're going to do is then look for a sound, any sound really. It doesn't really matter what sound you use. You can use percussive sounds, you can use melodic sounds. Just make sure that you have a sound that has a bit of character and add it right to the drop. And I really love these duduk sounds because they sound highly emotional. So I'm just going to add 1 to the drop over here. And this one's in D minor. So we're going to have to pitch it 1 semitone down so it fits our track. Make sure that the warping is set to 110. This is the original BPM of our duduk. And now I'm just going to chop the sound up so it is played right when the drop hits, right? Let's send it to our reverb and delay here. And let's see how it sounds. Nice. When I hit Option and Shift, I can then start scrolling through the sound. I can also change the grid here to an 8th. Then it'll start scrolling through the sound with an 8th grid. Nice. Then I can start messing with the sound here a bit more. Cool. And I can also perhaps add it here to the pre-drop, to the silence section here. Just mess around with the position and maybe add a couple more, maybe add one here, add one here. Just something that keeps the drop a bit more interesting and shifts the listener's focus. You can start shifting through the sound just like that. Ooh. And something that I like to do every now and then is then add sound design effects to the channel directly. So reverb and delay returns are for mixing, but if you'd like to, you can also add your effects like an echo. Echo is usually an effect that's supposed to be on a return channel. We can add it directly to the channel, and we're doing this for the sake of sound design, right? Just to get interesting sounds. Just gonna mess around with these sounds a bit here. And then you can just turn off your automation lock here, take your entire section and hit duplicate. So now you've extended your arrangement. And with each and every single break or build up, you can then try to add different types of automation, different types of elements. But ultimately, you just want to keep that tension wave throughout your track. Awesome. So let me give it a final playthrough here. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, like and subscribe. These sounds are available on Lotus Tunes, and this specific project file I'm going to make available on my Patreon page, so make sure to check that out as well. See you in the next video. Peace.